The Revari Dominion had conquered 400 worlds. They had burned civilizations that built cities of light. They had crushed species that could bend gravity with their minds. They had never lost a war, and they had never known fear. So when their scouts found a small blue planet circling an ordinary star in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, they did not worry. They did not plan carefully. They simply sent the fleet. Supreme Commander Tolik stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched the armada stretch out behind him like a river of metal and fire. 9,700 warships. It was the largest force ever sent to take a Class II world, a world that had not even learned to leave its own solar system. The Dominion War Council had told him it was too many ships. Tolik had smiled and said the extra ships were not for the humans. They were for everyone else who was watching. Let the galaxy see what happens when the Dominion chooses you. The intelligence reports on Earth were thorough. The humans had nuclear weapons, which was amusing. They had chemical rockets, which was sad. They had no energy shields, no plasma cannons, no faster-than-light engines, and no unified government. They spent most of their time arguing with each other over invisible lines drawn on their own dirt. Tolik's analysts estimated the conquest would take 72 rotations. Tolik thought that was generous. 8,000 light-years away, Colonel Una Park sat in a dark room filled with screens and the soft hum of machines. She worked at a joint aerospace monitoring station buried beneath the city of Daejeon in South Korea. Her job was to watch the sky for objects that should not be there. On most nights, there was nothing. On this night, her screen filled with light. She counted them slowly at first. Then she stopped counting and just stared. Thousands of objects, decelerating past Jupiter, each one larger than anything humanity had ever put into space. She picked up the phone and called her commanding officer. Her voice was calm, because panic would not help anyone, but her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the receiver. Within 6 hours, every major telescope on Earth confirmed what Una had found. Within 12 hours, the news broke. Within 24 hours, the world was on fire with fear. People ran through streets. Governments held emergency sessions. Religious leaders called it the end of days. Stock markets crashed so hard that money itself seemed to lose meaning overnight. But beneath the panic, in concrete bunkers and underground command rooms, something else was happening. The people whose job it was to fight were already fighting. Not with weapons yet, but with their minds. Lieutenant General Taeho Shin had been a soldier for 31 years. He had fought in places the news never talked about, led men through situations that would never appear in any official report, and buried friends whose names he still whispered to himself before sleep. When the United Nations Security Council created the Global Defense Coalition and needed someone to lead it, his name came up before anyone else's. He did not want the job. He took it anyway, because that was what soldiers did. Taeho stood before the combined chiefs of staff from 47 nations. The room was tense. Some of the generals looked afraid. Some looked angry. A few looked like they had already given up. Taeho looked at all of them and spoke in a voice that was not loud, but carried to every corner of the room. "They are expecting farmers with pitchforks," he said. "Let them." He laid out his doctrine in simple terms. Do not try to match the aliens in technology. Do not try to fight their kind of war. Use what humans have always used: creativity, deception, and a willingness to do terrible things to survive. Una Park was pulled from her monitoring post and brought into the coalition's strategic planning team. She had spent 4 days studying the alien fleet's formation, and she had found something important. The Revari moved in rigid patterns. Their ships were organized in strict layers, with command ships at the center of each group. Every smaller ship followed the orders of its command ship without question. If a command ship was destroyed, the ships under it did not adapt. They just stopped and waited for new orders. It is like cutting the head off a snake, Yuna told Tejo during their first briefing. Except these snakes have only one head and a very long body. Tejo nodded slowly. Then we become headhunters, he said. The coalition moved fast, faster than anyone thought possible. Old rivalries between nations were not forgotten, but they were set aside. Russian nuclear submarines surfaced next to American aircraft carriers. Chinese missile batteries were linked to European radar networks. Indian Space Command shared satellite data with everyone. For the first time in human history, the entire species pointed in the same direction. And then, Earth went dark. Every civilian broadcast stopped. Every radio station, every television signal, every satellite uplink that was not military went silent. The order came from the coalition, and every government obeyed without argument. From space, the planet that had been buzzing with electromagnetic noise for over a century suddenly looked dead. On the Rivari flagship, analysts noticed the silence and made notes in their reports. The primitive species had gone quiet. This was normal. This was what prey did when the predator arrived. They froze. They hoped the danger would pass. It never did. Tolik read the report and felt nothing but mild satisfaction. Everything was going according to pattern. He had seen this behavior on dozens of worlds. The silence of surrender, he called it. But Tolik had never invaded Earth. He had never fought humans. And he did not understand that when humans went quiet, it did not mean they had given up. It meant they were done talking. Across the planet, in silos buried under mountains and beneath oceans, in hangars hidden inside forests and deserts, in laboratories and workshops and garages, humanity prepared for war. Not with hope, not with confidence, but with something far more dangerous than either. Spite. The sky above Earth was still clear and blue. But it would not stay that way for long. The Armada was coming, and when it arrived, it would find not a frightened world on its knees, but a species that had spent its entire existence learning one thing above all others: how to kill anything that tried to kill it first. The Rivari fleet settled into orbit around Earth's moon, like a dark cloud that had swallowed the stars. From the surface, people could see them at night, tiny points of light that moved too slowly to be satellites and too fast to be stars. There were so many that they changed the shape of the sky. Supreme Commander Tolik ordered the standard subjugation broadcast. It was a message the Dominion had sent to 400 worlds before this one, and it always said the same thing: surrender your governments, disarm your forces, present your leaders for processing. The message was translated into 14 human languages, which told the coalition something important. The Rivari had been watching Earth for a long time. They had studied humanity. They thought they understood it. Earth did not respond. Tolik waited one rotation, then two. On the third rotation, he grew impatient and ordered the first wave. 600 landing ships detached from the main fleet and began their descent toward Earth's major cities. The strategy was old and proven. Land in the population centers, destroy the infrastructure, capture the leadership. It had worked on every world the Dominion had ever taken. What Tolik did not know was that Captain Jizu Han had not slept in 3 days. She was a Navy electronic warfare specialist, and she had been assigned to a listening post inside a mountain in Gangwon province. When the Rivari broadcast their subjugation message, they revealed their communication frequencies. Jizu had spent 72 hours tearing those frequencies apart, mapping their encryption patterns, and building a system that could decode their fleet communications in near real time. By the time the first wave launched, Earth could hear every order the Rivari gave. 600 ships, first wave, Jizu reported to the coalition command. They are targeting 32 cities. Landing formation is standard column. No escort fighters. They think this is a parade. Tae-ho-shin listened to the report and felt the cold calm that always came over him before a fight. He gave one order. Wait until they are below 40 kilometers. Then give them everything. The 600 Revari landing ships came down through the atmosphere like burning arrows. They were enormous, each one the size of a football stadium, with smooth hulls that glowed with energy shields designed to deflect plasma weapons. The Revari pilots were relaxed. Some of them had done this dozens of times on other worlds. It was routine. At 40 kilometers altitude, Earth opened fire. Every surface-to-air missile system on the planet launched at once. Anti-ballistic missile platforms in 12 countries fired their interceptors. Prototype railguns in the United States and China sent tungsten rods screaming upward at 10 times the speed of sound. And from hidden silos across every continent, thousands of repurposed intercontinental ballistic missiles rose on columns of fire, their nuclear warheads replaced with massive fragmentation payloads designed to fill the sky with metal. The Revari shields were built to stop plasma. They were built to stop directed energy weapons. They were built to stop everything that every advanced civilization in the galaxy used to fight wars. But no advanced civilization used kinetic weapons. No one in the galaxy threw rocks anymore. It was considered primitive, embarrassing. No species that had discovered energy manipulation would ever go back to simply hitting things with other things. Humanity had never stopped hitting things with other things. It was what they were best at. The first wave of missiles hit the Revari shields and punched through them like they were made of paper. The fragmentation warheads detonated and filled the sky with clouds of shrapnel, moving at impossible speeds. Tungsten rods from the railguns tore through hulls designed to withstand plasma temperatures, but not physical impact. Ships broke apart. Ships exploded. Ships fell from the sky in pieces, trailing fire and smoke across the horizon. 214 ships were destroyed before they reached the ground. The rest landed hard, damaged and burning, their crews shaken and confused. Nothing in their training had prepared them for this. Nothing in the history of the Dominion had prepared them for this. On the ground, things got worse. The Revari soldiers were impressive. They stood over 2 meters tall, with natural bone armor across their chests and arms, and they carried plasma rifles that could melt through concrete. In formation on open ground against a conventional enemy, they were unstoppable. Humans did not fight on open ground, and humans were anything but conventional. Sergeant Do-ha Kim was a Korean Marine stationed in Busan. When the first Revari ships crashed into the industrial district near the port, he gathered his squad and went hunting. The Revari marched through the streets in perfect columns, scanning for military targets, following their doctrine exactly as they had been trained. Do-ha watched them from the 4th floor of an abandoned apartment building. He noticed they never looked up. He noticed they never checked corners. He noticed they walked in straight lines and never varied their spacing. He smiled, and it was not a kind smile. His squad hit the Revari column with anti-tank mines buried under the road, rocket-propelled grenades fired from 3 different buildings at once, and a hail of rifle fire aimed at the gaps in their bone armor, the joints, the neck, the backs of the knees. The Revari soldiers fell in groups, confused and enraged, firing their plasma weapons at buildings that were already empty, because Do-ha's squad had moved the moment they pulled their triggers. This scene repeated itself in every city where the Revari landed. In Tokyo, subway tunnels became kill zones. In New York, skyscrapers became sniper nests. In Mumbai, the narrow streets turned into mazes where the tall, rigid Revari could not move or fight effectively. In Sao Paulo, civilians joined soldiers and threw everything they had, gasoline, homemade explosives, stolen alien weapons, at any Revari that moved. Do-ha filed his after-action report that evening from a basement that smelled like smoke and blood. He wrote, They walk in straight lines. They do not check corners. They do not look up. I almost feel bad. He did not feel bad. On the flagship, Tolik stared at the casualty reports and felt something he had never felt before. It was small and unfamiliar, like a crack in a wall he had always believed was solid. He had lost over 200 ships in a single day to a species that did not even have energy weapons. His ground forces were being torn apart by creatures half their size, using weapons made of metal and fire and rage. He told himself it was an anomaly. He told himself the humans had used their best weapons and would have nothing left. He told himself that the second wave would finish this. He ordered the second wave. And somewhere deep inside that unfamiliar crack, in a place he would never admit existed, Tolik felt the first cold touch of doubt. Tolik sent 4,000 ships in the second and third waves. This time he did not send them to land. He sent them to burn. Orbital bombardment began on the 9th day. Plasma strikes fell from the sky like the anger of a god, each one turning city blocks into glass and ash. Seoul, London, Cairo, Los Angeles. One by one, the great cities of Earth were hit. Not destroyed entirely. The Revari wanted the planet intact for harvesting, but wounded so deeply that the smoke from the fires darkened the sun across entire continents. Millions died, not in battle, but in their homes, in their beds, in the streets where they were running. The plasma came without warning and left nothing behind but silence and heat. Children who had been sleeping woke up in a world that was on fire, and some of them never woke up at all. The Coalition Command Center survived because they had been built underground, deep in mountains and beneath the ocean floor. Taeho Shin stood in a bunker, carved into the rock beneath Gyeryong, in South Korea, and watched the damage reports come in. His face showed nothing. His hands were steady. But the people who knew him well could see the weight settling on his shoulders like something physical, something that would eventually crush him if he let it. He did not let it. There was no time. They want us to break, Taeho said to his staff. They want us to see the fire and the death and decide it is not worth fighting anymore. That is how it works on other worlds. The species sees the destruction, loses hope and surrenders. He paused. They do not understand what we are. Humanity did not break. It bent, it bled, it screamed, but it did not break. And then it adapted. Dr. Eunji Baek was a physicist. Before the invasion, she had been working on quantum computing at KAIST, the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology. She was 34 years old. She wore glasses that were always slightly crooked, and she had a habit of talking to herself when she was thinking hard about something. When the first Revari ships were shot down, coalition recovery teams pulled pieces of alien technology from the wreckage and sent them to every laboratory that was still standing. Eunji received a damaged shield generator and 3 power cells. She did not sleep for 6 days. On the 7th day, she called the coalition command and said 4 words. I understand their shields. The Revari shields worked by creating a field of aligned energy particles that deflected incoming energy. Plasma, lasers, directed radiation. The field was tuned to counter specific energy signatures. Kinetic weapons worked against the shields because the field simply was not designed to stop physical objects. She saw that the field had a frequency, and that frequency could be matched and cancelled. Within 2 weeks, her team built the first hybrid weapon. It was ugly. It was a human missile with a Revari energy emitter strapped to its nose, wired together with copper cable and held in place with welding and hope. When it fired, the emitter broadcast a frequency that cancelled the Revari shield for a fraction of a second, just long enough for the missile behind it to pass through and detonate against the naked hull. The first test destroyed a grounded Revari transport ship so completely that there was nothing left but a crater and a smell like burned metal. Yunji stood at the edge of the crater, her crooked glasses reflecting the smoke, and said to herself, "That will work." The hybrid weapons were not perfect. They failed about 40% of the time. And when they failed, the missiles just bounced off the shields like stones thrown at a wall. But 60% was enough. 60% changed the math. While Unji was building weapons that could kill ships, Major Suho Lim was planning something that most people called insane. He was a fighter pilot, one of the best Korea had ever produced, and he had spent his career training for a war that everyone assumed would be fought against other humans. Now he was planning the first human attack against targets in orbit. The plan was simple in the way that only desperate plans can be. Coalition forces had captured several intact Revari shuttlecraft from the ground battles. Suho would fly these captured ships into orbit, using their alien transponders to get close to the Revari fleet. Once close enough, his squadron, flying modified human jets loaded with the new hybrid missiles, would launch from inside the captured ships, fire at point-blank range, and try to escape before the fleet could respond. He said he knew. Suho launched on a Tuesday morning with 11 other pilots. They rode inside the captured Revari shuttles like soldiers hiding inside wooden horses, which was a comparison that made the historians on the planning staff smile grimly. The Revari fleet did not fire on the shuttles. Why would they? They were Revari ships. When the shuttles reached attack range, Suho gave the order. The bay doors opened. 12 human jets screamed out into the vacuum of space, each one carrying 4 hybrid missiles. They had 45 seconds before the fleet's defense systems would react. They needed 30. Suho aimed for the largest ship he could see, a command carrier, a vessel so enormous that it blocked out the stars behind it. He fired all 4 missiles. 3 of them worked. They phased through the carrier's shields and struck the hull, detonating deep inside the ship where the armor was thin and the systems were fragile. The command carrier broke in half. The explosion was so bright that people on Earth's surface saw it during the day, a new star that flared and died in the span of a heartbeat. In bunkers and basements and ruined buildings, people who had been crying stopped and looked up. People who had been silent began to shout. 7 of Suho's 12 pilots made it back. Suho was one of them, though his jet was so damaged that it had to be carried home inside one of the captured shuttles. When he landed, he climbed out of the broken aircraft on shaking legs and said, "I want to do that again." The destruction of the command carrier did exactly what Yuna Park had predicted. Every ship slave to that carrier lost coordination for 6 hours. Over 300 Revari vessels drifted without orders, unable to act, unable to fight, unable to do anything but wait. Human ground forces used those 6 hours to destroy dozens of grounded ships that could not call for help. Taeho Shin watched the reports and allowed himself a small, thin smile. Then he called his commanders together and gave them new orders. "We are done defending," he said. "From now on, we hunt their commanders. Every command ship we kill is 300 ships that go blind. Find them, kill them, do not stop." Far above the burning Earth, on his damaged flagship, Tolik received a message from the Dominion High Council. It was short and cold. "Why is this taking so long?" He had no answer. 3 months after the first ships appeared in Earth's sky, the war had become something that neither side had expected. The Revari had committed over 8,000 ships. They held pieces of every continent. Their orbital guns could strike any point on the surface within seconds. By every measure used in the Dominion's long history of conquest, they were winning. But the numbers told a different story. Commander Nari Cho had been an intelligence officer before the invasion. She was quiet, precise, and had a way of looking at chaos and finding the pattern hidden inside it. In 3 months of war, she had risen through the ranks, Not because she sought power, but because the people above her kept dying, and she kept being the one who knew what to do next. Now she stood before the Joint Coalition Command, what was left of it, and presented the math. "They lose 40 ships a day," she said. Her voice was flat, almost bored, as if she were reading a weather report. "Some days, more. Anti-air batteries account for 12. Ground-launched hybrid missiles account for 15. Captured alien weapons account for 8. The rest are lost to ambushes, sabotage, and methods we have not officially categorized because our people keep inventing new ones." She clicked to the next screen. "They cannot replace their ships. Their nearest shipyard is 1,100 light-years away. Every ship they lose is gone forever." She clicked again. "We lose cities, we lose people, we lose things that cannot be measured in numbers. But we can rebuild cities. We cannot rebuild their fleet. If we survive long enough, we win." The room was silent. Taeho Shin sat in the back, his arms folded, his eyes closed. He was not sleeping. He was thinking. Nari continued, "The question is not whether we can win. The question is whether we can survive the cost." No one answered, because everyone in the room already knew the cost. 800 million people were dead. Entire regions were uninhabitable. The air itself was poisoned in some places. The world that would exist after this war, if there was an after, would not look anything like the world that had existed before. But it would be a human world, and that was enough. On the ground, the Ravari soldiers were falling apart in ways that their commanders could not understand. The Dominion had conquered species that were stronger, faster, smarter, and more technologically advanced than humans. But every one of those species had eventually accepted defeat. They fought hard, then they fought less hard, then they stopped fighting altogether. It was the natural order of things. When you were beaten, you surrendered. Everything in the galaxy understood this. Humans did not understand this. Humans refused to understand this. 3 months into an occupation that should have broken them in the first week, human resistance was not decreasing. It was getting worse. Every day, there were more ambushes, more traps, more attacks from directions that should have been impossible. The humans fought from sewers and rooftops and subway tunnels. They fought with stolen weapons and homemade bombs, and in several documented cases, with their bare hands. Ravari soldiers began refusing to enter buildings. They began flinching at shadows. They began doing something that their species had no word for, because in 10,000 years of galactic expansion, they had never needed a word for it. Their officers called it combat fatigue. The human soldiers who captured their communications and translated them had a simpler word. They called it fear. Private Hana Jong was 19 years old. Before the invasion, she had been a university student in Gwangju, studying literature. She had liked poetry and quiet afternoons, and a cat named Bami, who lived in the alley behind her dormitory. The invasion had taken all of those things from her. It had given her a rifle, a uniform, and a rage that she carried in her chest like a second heartbeat. Hana became famous because of a video. A drone camera, one of the last still flying in her sector, captured footage of her encounter with a Ravari mech suit, a walking weapons platform that stood 4 meters tall and was designed to be invincible against infantry. Hana's squad had been caught in the open when the mech appeared. There was no cover, no retreat, and no heavy weapons. Her squad leader was dead. 3 of her squad mates were wounded. Hana did not run. She pulled a homemade EMP device from her pack, a crude thing built from a car battery and scavenged electronics, and sprinted directly at the mech suit. The Ravari pilot saw her coming and fired. The plasma bolt missed by less than a meter, close enough to burn the hair on the left side of her head. She threw the EMP at the mech's legs. The device detonated. The mech's systems flickered and froze for 3 seconds. 3 seconds was enough. Hana grabbed the fire axe from the emergency case on the nearest wall, climbed the frozen mech like a ladder, and buried the axe in the joint where the pilot's canopy met the body. She hit it 4 times. The canopy cracked. She hit it twice more. The canopy broke. The Rivari pilot inside looked up at her with an expression that on any species in any galaxy clearly meant terror. The footage spread across what remained of the internet within hours. Humanity had a new symbol. A teenage girl with half her hair burned off, standing on top of a dead war machine, holding a fire axe, with an expression on her face that was not victory and not anger, but something older and deeper than both. Talik watched the footage too. His analysts flagged it as significant, not because of the tactical impact, one mech suit meant nothing, but because of the psychological effect it had on both sides. Human resistance forces were energized. Rivari ground troops became more afraid. Talik made his decision. He could not win this war on the ground. Every day on the ground cost him more than the last. The humans were like water. They filled every gap, seeped into every crack, and could not be held or contained, no matter how much force he applied. The only way to end this was from orbit. Total bombardment. Glass the surface. Kill everything. He would lose the planet's resources. The Dominion would be displeased. But at least the war would be over, and this nightmare species would be dead. He gave the order to consolidate the fleet. All remaining ships pulled back from their scattered positions and gathered in a tight formation in low Earth orbit, preparing for the bombardment sequence. It would take 6 hours to charge the orbital guns to full power. In 6 hours, every living thing on Earth's surface would be ash. What Talik did not know was that Taeho Shin had been waiting for exactly this moment. For weeks, the coalition had been hiding something. Every remaining missile, every surviving nuclear warhead, every hybrid weapon that Unji Bek's underground factories had produced, every captured alien ship that could still fly, all of it had been held back, stockpiled, and prepared for a single coordinated strike. They called it Operation Iron Sky. Taeho stood in the command bunker and looked at the clock. 6 hours. That was how long he had to launch the largest attack in human history against the most powerful fleet ever assembled above his world. He picked up the phone. All stations, he said. Begin countdown. Dawn came to Earth in pieces. It came to the Pacific first, painting the ocean gold beneath a sky that was still choked with smoke and dust. It came to Asia next, where the shattered skylines of 100 cities caught the light like broken teeth. It came to Europe and Africa and the Americas, one time zone at a time, as if the sun itself was making one last sweep of the world before everything changed. In bunkers and silos and hidden bases across every continent, men and women stood at their stations and waited for the word. Submarine crews sat in silence beneath dark oceans. Pilots strapped into cockpits that smelled of fuel and sweat. Soldiers on the ground loaded captured alien weapons and pointed them at the sky. Engineers ran final checks on hybrid missiles held together with welding wire and prayer. Everyone was afraid. Everyone was ready. Taeho Shin stood in the command bunker and watched the clock count down. Above him, the Rivari fleet had pulled into a tight formation in low orbit. Thousands of ships packed together, charging their orbital bombardment weapons. In less than 2 hours, they would fire, and the surface of the Earth would become glass. Taeho had one shot. One chance to throw everything humanity had left at the enemy, and hope it was enough. He thought about his daughter. She was 7. She was in a shelter somewhere beneath Jeju Island. He had not spoken to her in 11 days. He pushed the thought away because if he held it too long, it would break him. And he could not break. Not yet. All stations report ready, said a voice on the radio. Taeho closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he opened them. Fire. The earth erupted. From every continent, from every ocean, from every hidden place where humanity had buried its last weapons, the sky filled with fire and metal and fury. Thousands of missiles launched at once. ICBMs that had been built to destroy other nations now aimed at the stars. Hybrid weapons screamed upward on trails of white smoke, their stolen alien emitters glowing hot. Nuclear warheads, the last ones left, rose from submarine tubes and mountain silos. Captured Revari shuttles, packed with explosives and rigged to fly on autopilot, climbed toward orbit like burning coffins. Jisoo Han sat in the ruins of her communications center, blood running from a cut above her eye, and executed the electronic warfare plan she had spent 3 months building. Every frequency the Revari used was suddenly flooded with noise, a wall of static and false signals and garbage data that blinded their sensors and confused their targeting systems. For 60 precious seconds, the Revari fleet could not see what was coming. By the time they could see, it was too late. He had 12 pilots left from the original squadron, flying machines that were more patched than aircraft. He knew that most of them would not come home. They knew it too. Nobody said anything about it, because there was nothing to say. They flew into the swarm of missiles and used their jets to draw defensive fire away from the warheads, to act as shields and decoys and sacrificial targets, so that the weapons behind them could reach the fleet. Una Park sat in a bunker that was half buried in rubble, her screens cracked and flickering, and called out targets with a voice that did not shake. She had mapped every command ship in the Revari fleet. She knew where they were, how they were positioned, and which ones to hit first to cause the most chaos. She fed coordinates to the missile batteries in real time, adjusting trajectories, redirecting warheads, making sure that every weapon found the target that mattered most. On the ground, Do-ha Kim stood on the roof of a destroyed building and fired a captured anti-orbital cannon at the sky. Beside him, Hana Jong operated a second cannon, her burned hair tied back, her hands steady on the controls. They fired again and again, sending bolts of alien energy into the formation above them, adding their fire to the storm. The salvo hit the Revari fleet like nothing in the history of the galaxy. The formation that was the Revari's greatest strength became their death. Packed tight for the bombardment, the ships had nowhere to run. The first wave of hybrid missiles phased through shields and detonated against hulls. Ships exploded, and their explosions caught neighboring ships, which caught more ships, which caught more. Chain reactions ripped through the formation like fire through dry grass. Nuclear warheads detonated in the gaps between vessels, and turned clusters of warships into expanding clouds of superheated metal. The captured shuttles, loaded with every explosive compound human engineers could find, flew into the hearts of command carriers and erased them from existence. Tolik stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched his fleet die. He had been a conqueror his entire life. He had broken worlds and enslaved civilizations, and never once doubted that the Dominion was eternal and unstoppable. Now he stood in the light of 1,000 burning ships, and understood, with perfect clarity, that he had been wrong. He opened a channel to the Dominion High Council. His voice was steady, because he was still a commander, even at the end. "Do not come here," he said. "Do not ever come here. They are not what we thought. They are not what anyone thought. They are 6 nuclear warheads, targeted by Una Park with the last of her functioning equipment, struck the flagship at the same moment. The ship and everything inside it ceased to exist. When the fire stopped and the debris began its slow fall through Earth's atmosphere, like a rain of burning metal, the coalition counted what was left of the Revari Armada. Of 9,700 ships, only 17 remained. They were damaged, drifting, their weapons dead, their crews alive but broken in a way that went deeper than injury. Nari Cho contacted the command bunker. 17 survivors, she said. I can have them destroyed within the hour. Teho-shin was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "No, sir." "Dead fleets tell no stories," Teho said. He spoke slowly, as if he was choosing each word with great care. "Let them go. Let those 17 ships limp home. Let every species in their dominion see the footage from their cameras. Let them look at their star maps, find this small blue planet, and know what happens if they ever come here again." Nari was silent for a moment. Then she said, "Understood." The 17 ships were not fired upon. They drifted, gathered themselves, and turned away from Earth. Their engines flickered to life, weak and stuttering, and they began the long journey home. As they pulled away from orbit, Jisoo Han sat in her ruined command post, wiped the blood from her face, and typed a message into her console. She broadcasted on the Rivari communication frequency, in their own language, using the translation system she had built from nothing in the first days of the war. The message was short. "Tell them Earth says hello." The 17 ships carried that message across the stars. They carried the footage from their cameras, the missiles rising from a planet that should have been helpless. The explosions that consumed the mightiest fleet the Dominion had ever assembled, and the face of a species that had looked at annihilation and answered it with fire. The Rivari Dominion collapsed within a decade. The footage spread to every corner of the galaxy. Dozens of enslaved worlds rose up, because now they knew the truth. The Dominion could be beaten. It had been beaten by a species so primitive that it had not even left its own solar system. Earth rebuilt. It mourned its dead, over 800 million gone. The scars on the land and the hearts of those who survived would never fully heal. But the species endured, as it always had, as it always would. And in the strategic databases of every galactic power, in the war rooms of every empire and federation and alliance that watched the stars, a new entry appeared. It was flagged in red, which was the color every species in the galaxy used for danger, because some things are universal. The entry read, Class 2 Planet, Sol System, 3rd Orbit, Local Designation, Earth. Status, Do not engage. Threat level, Absolute.